Hi everybody, welcome to another edition of the Writer's Block. I'm your host, Matt Robinson. As our viewers know, we've had a lot of very special guests on the show, a lot of great conversations, but I gotta say, today's guest is a little extra special to me because as a third generation terrier, I've always had a special place in my heart for the great leader of Boston University, John Silber. And over the course of his career, which as many of you know, also included a run for the governorship, he was called a lot of names, nice names, leader, rival, visionary, professor, and president. But of all those names, one extra special one would be Daddy. And of all the people who've known him, only 7 people had that honor of using that name. One of them is with us today. This is Rachel Silber Devlin, who is recently written a book about her famous father. It's called Snapshots of My Father, John Silber. As for Rachel, she is John's eldest daughter, eldest of 7. She grew up in Austin when he was the Dean of Arts and Sciences at the University of Texas, moved to Boston when he moved to BU, attended Wellesley College, moved back to Texas for a time, and then came back to Massachusetts to get her educational degree and now lives nearby in Newton. In the book, she recalls growing up in the Silber household and watching her father rise through the ranks of academia, and tells a lot of great stories about the people that he met and that she got to meet along the way. So I'm extra honored and pleased to welcome you today, Rachel. Thank you for being on the Writer's Block.
Great pleasure to be here.
The book is absolutely terrific. As I said, even though I wasn't at the school during his tenure, I followed the story because of my family involvement with the school. And he really took it from a commuter school to a preeminent research university that's basically owns everything from Fenway outward. It's great to see the school continue to grow and continue to build on his legacy. So what was it like growing up as a Silber?
There were very high expectations, as you can imagine. We were expected to make good grades and present ourselves with a certain amount of decorum. But we were a very warm family. When in the evening we would wait for Pop to come home for dinner. Sometimes we would wait a long time. But he would come even if he knew he would have to go back to the office for several hours after dinner. And it didn't seem like that it was out of duty. It was like there was a magnetic force and he wanted to be there with us. He also, we didn't try to have breakfast together, but he would be there with his coffee or tea, whipping through several newspapers in the morning as we came in, one after the other, to eat and get to school or out to do activities. And if you read the paper after he did, it would have gaping holes and whole pages torn out. And he was an active newspaper reader.
I would say, yeah, that sounds pretty active. Just as a side note, I know you went into education.
Yes.
Did other of your siblings follow into education?
Well, one of my siblings did get a degree in education, but she has really made her career in the business world, and her children have been the only ones who benefited from her education experience.
Yeah, I did. I'm a teacher myself, and especially during COVID, it was dad's school, and it was fun. It was I had 2 wonderful students.
That's great. Yes.
So enough about me. What are some of your fond family memories of growing up?
I just loved being taught to waltz and foxtrot. My dad taught me. I taught him to twist, which helped him throw his back out once. But it was fun, and he was a great whistler. He was a great singer. He loved trumpet music. He'd studied trumpet for much of his life, and he actually went to his first year of college studying the trumpet, but decided he wasn't quite good enough. But we always had trumpet music like Al Hurt and Louis Armstrong, Tijuana Brass with Herb Alpert.
Right. Yeah, so I guess the Boston Symphony's loss was Boston University's gain in a way?
Absolutely.
So you talked about the high standard in your family. What do you think drove your father to to have such high standards for himself and to succeed as he did?
I think he was always just such a bold, strong character. It was in his nature. And when he was very young, around 10 years old, he was riding on a bus and an elderly black woman got on, and he got up to offer his seat, and some people yelled at him for doing that, and the woman went on back to the back of the bus. But my father was so angry that everything he'd been taught by his parents and been taught in Sunday school was just being trounced. You know, being deferential to women, being deferential to the elderly. It's all out the window. So he just stood angrily through the rest of the ride. He refused to sit down. And that was just a strong indication of how his life would go. He always had strong opinions, and he carried on in that way too. He became a census worker and found some deplorable conditions, and then later as a professor, one of his big assignments each year was to send his students out, he called it the slum project, to find areas of urban decay and to investigate who were the landlords. Were they fulfilling their legal obligations? Serious stuff for young undergraduates, but it was his idea of what real activism was, where you're actually doing something actively good instead of just shouting down the other side.
And you think that helped him in his academic and political career as well?
I think it was just part of his nature, and so that's how his academic career and everything would go. He, at Boston University, he just tried to bring the best teachers. If he was recruiting a Nobel laureate, he would be very sure that they were interested in teaching, not just writing their next book or doing their next research, but actually interested in teaching. And also bringing cultural events to Boston University, the Opera Institute, the Huntington Theater, plays, operas, music of all kinds. He was always interested in all of that.
It really became a lot more than schools of its kind, or than probably a lot of people expected it to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, your father had a physical challenge.
Yes, he did.
Do you think that impacted how he kind of stood up for other people who were facing challenges?
He had a birth defect, an arm shortened with what he called a stub at the end of it. But his parents made the decision early on to make sure he had as normal a life as possible. And so they just held their breath when he was climbing trees and things like that, but he did normal things. But yeah, I think that he was challenged. Sometimes he was called names. He was, he reacted the way you would expect. He was in plenty of fights on the schoolyard. But I think it also made him a little fierce in certain situations. I mean, he had such a huge personality. One of his leading characteristics was humor, but he could be fierce, and he would certainly prefer for you to think he's a real, son of a gun than to think he's handicapped or to pity him.
What do you think led him to education and what brought him here in particular?
He was always interested in education from the earliest time when he was working on the commission that created Head Start. So it's been a lifelong interest. But the reason he came to BU, he thought he would be at the University of Texas for his whole career, but he was fired.
Oh.
He had a confrontation with the Board of Trustees over they wanted to divide up the College of Arts and Sciences, and instead of having it together, they wanted it separate. And he just liked a well-rounded education. He was very outspoken, but he was also getting a lot of interest from well-to-do audiences politically at that time. And I think that is the real reason he was fired. But when we were looking across the country at the dinner table in the evening, we'd talk about Colorado or California or where all the different offers were coming from. And Boston University was the most interesting, and it really gave my dad a chance to do the real work that he wanted to do, because it was on the edge of bankruptcy and it was not very well known in a way. So it gave him free rein in a way to do what he wanted to do.
A little more of a blank canvas.
Yes.
That he clearly did shape.
Yes.
Yeah. You talked about the audiences. Your father, throughout his career, had some notable friends as well.
Oh, yes.
What was it like, growing up among presidents and celebrities and all sorts of those type of people?
Well, you never knew who you were going to meet. And so many of his friends were well-known or artistic or, literary figures. But just meeting people like Mayor Menino up close. Tom Menino was such a powerhouse and physically powerful. And meeting him up close was very impressive in a way that you don't get from a newspaper or television. And Angela Lansbury, who I've met several times and who became a very good friend of my dad, she was just so lovely. And when my youngest daughter met her for the first time, Claudia asked her, well, in Bedknobs and Broomsticks, how did you get that broomstick to fly? And Angela was just so perfect. She said to her, well, a broomstick is just a wooden handle and some straw. It's not really much. But if you want to get it to fly, you have to use magic. So she was perfect.
What about the run for the governorship? What was that episode like?
It was such a whirlwind, and for me and my husband and my kids, we were just always driving to every different event. We tried to be there for many of the rallies. We attended all of the debates, and in the morning we'd wake up to see what was the next Silber shocker. And the only reason these were considered shocking was because they were so blunt, because they weren't derived by a focus group, because Pop really was so forthright. And one of them, he was paraphrasing Shakespeare. He said, when you've had a long life and you're ripe, it's time to go. Well, he was accused of trying to ration health care. And that wasn't his point. His point was health care is being rationed. It's always being rationed. And we ought to do this more thoughtfully, and the priority should be for the young rather than the very, very old. So.
You talked about your family being important, your father doing his best to be home for dinner.
Yes.
To what extent did his triumphs and challenges outside the house come into the house, or was it through the door, separate life?
I didn't hear about lots of his triumphs at the time because he had so many. He was just constantly doing amazing things and being honored and awarded, or doing really important work. So a lot of it I would find out later, or who knows. But it was wonderful to be the child of someone who had such a position. Even from my earliest years, going to a PTA meeting and the man up there is droning on about teachers who are selfless and do it because of the love of the job. And Pop stood up and made a speech about more money for teachers, and everybody was so excited, and wow, he had that effect on people.
What are some of the things for which you're most proud of your father?
I would say all of the cultural things that he brought to Boston University, the Huntington Theater, and bringing Phyllis Curtin, who created the Opera Institute, and all of that. But also that he was such a man of character, and I would hope that people would remember him as a man of character. He stuck to his principles because he believed them. Late in life, he had kidney failure, and he was on dialysis, which was very painful for him and very difficult. And then the doctors offered him a kidney transplant. And my sisters and I were overjoyed, what a reprieve. But he would not even let us think about it. He knew that there were many, many younger people on the list, and he was not going to jump ahead and take that away from somebody else.
Wow, that is quite the principle.
Yeah.
So are those the type of things that prompted the book? You want to kind of celebrate and put the appropriate angle on the story?
It's partly that, yes. He was such a great individual, such an original character. And when he died, a lot of people who knew him suggested to me that I write the book. And I just wondered, well, how can I do this? It's such a huge subject. It would be several volumes. I don't know that I can. And then I also thought, there are a lot of people who don't even know him, and I would like to present him. And then I figured out, I can't tell everything, but with each chapter, I can give another aspect of him and create something that is a true picture of who he was. And that's what I was going for. Warts and all, but something that is an astounding true picture.
What was involved with the research other than family stories and your own memories?
Well, I did get to speak with a lot of people who knew him, and I loved hearing their John Silber stories, and many of them found their way to the book. But I also got to go through all of the files at Boston University Photography, and the difficult part was narrowing down the number that I used. There are 200 pictures in the book, but I could have had 3 or 4 times as many because there were so many great shots, and the wonderful photographers there, they kept this great record.
What were some of the biggest surprises, like maybe stories you hadn't heard before?
I had not heard about his dealings with Professor Barker, who ran the prison program. And, she had sort of wanted Pop to come and see it, but she was also worried that he might not like it and cut it off. But when he did go to see one of their graduations, it was really impressive to him, and I can't remember the wonderful names of the characters that he met, but they were powerful, sort of scary prisoners, but they had gotten they'd been working on their degrees, and it gave them something positive to do in prison, and my dad felt like it was such an important thing for them to do. And they had made a plaque that said, our education set us free, and then when they presented it to him, one of them said to Pop, but we've got our degrees, and now we really need a graduate program to set us free. And Pop just said to his vice president, he said, make it happen. And it did.
Other than the road that's now named for him,
Yeah.
on which the School of Education went, which was my part of the alma mater, my BU legacy, what do you think is the most like concrete change that he made, like in Boston, either on campus or just in the city?
I do think the campus changed completely because of Boston University. First of all, we reclaimed Kenmore Square. It was a den of iniquity in the early days, and there were always, gunfire, and there was a nightclub called Lucifer's, and you never knew what was going to happen in Kenmore Square. But it has been reclaimed as a real magnet in the area, and that was part of what he did. Sadly, the BU bookstore is not there anymore. That was one of Pop's great achievements. A glorious multi-story Viennese cafe, gorgeous polished wood, and he thought of it as a great place for students to have downtime and hear authors speak and things like that. But I'm not sure exactly what happened to that, but it's no longer there.
Yeah. So we're honored that this is your first television interview, and I understand that you're actually going to be speaking at BU soon. What do you think it'll be like to bring this story back to kind of where it all began, as it were?
I think it's going to be wonderful. I do look forward to speaking there, and I expect to recognize many of the people in the audience. But just trying to promote this book has been a whole new experience for me. Since January, I've written 5 articles that have appeared in 4 different blogs, and 1 has just appeared in Commonwealth magazine.
Wow.
So that's been a new thing for me, to just be able to whip up an article. Somebody seems interested, so I can write about that. And of course, it's all different ways of promoting the book.
So like focusing on individual stories and
Yes.
episodes. I see. Yeah. Where else are you planning to take it back to Texas? Are there other places?
Yes,
you'd like
I
to
do.
particularly share?
I hope to speak at the University of Texas also, but I also just plan to visit bookstores and libraries in this area, because I think it's a great story, and I think it could find an audience with a lot of different people.
So what are the best ways if people want to reach out to you to ask questions, to share stories, to
Okay.
find out where you're speaking next? How can they best reach you?
Well, I am on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, and I'm on Twitter, and people have reached out to me, instant messaged me, or direct message, I don't remember what they're called, but people have reached me that way, and I've been able to get in touch with them or answer questions, or sometimes they give me really good stories.
Yeah, when I did my book, it was the stories that came after
Yeah.
that were some of the best parts. Yeah.
I think it just continues to be wonderful.
Do you see? Is there more to tell? You talked about all the pictures that you weren't able to use.
Well, there could be, but who knows?
See how this
This
work
was
on
just-
this one for now.
I know, this
sure is
is-
a lot of work. Obviously.
It was,
and
and
it's
it
a lot of
is.
stories to tell.
But it was a labor of love too.
That's obvious. It's a
Yeah.
really fabulous book. You've alluded to it, referred to it many times. What would be, if you had like 3 points of his legacy that you'd either from the book or just in general, what were the 3 most important things you would like people to know about your father, think about your father, remember about your father?
Well, besides that he was a man of principle, I would like them to remember all of the good things he did for, with Head Start, with the Chelsea program, where Boston University took on the Chelsea schools for 20 years and really revived them. What other university president would even be brave enough to take on a project like that when the Chelsea schools were in receivership? It's just not likely to happen. Those things, but more than that, his interest in cultural affairs was so important. And you can't have anything on a university if you don't have freedom of speech. So that would be his most important issue. And he was early on, he was one of the early ones to realize that how important that was on college campuses. If you can't have freedom of speech, you can't investigate any issue. If you're afraid that you'll lose your job or lose your, be called names, if you mention a subject, how can you discuss it?
Right. Yeah, I think he'd be a little dismayed by what's been going on these days. So hopefully people read the book, remember his legacy. It was a great book about a great man and a great daughter and a great author. So please, everyone, check out Snapshots of My Father, John Silber, Rachel Silber Devlin. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you all for joining us on the Writer's Block. We hope to see you next time.